Right. Hi, everyone who's joined us so far. We'll just give it another minute or two for some other folks to trickle in, and then we'll get started. All right, just give it one more minute, and we'll kick off. All right, so why don't we get started and other folks can trickle in. Thank you, first of all, everyone, for joining us today. We've got a really exciting webinar, and we're really excited to have you here today to talk about how your organization can start to get going with generative AI, or if you've already started your generative AI journey, how to sort of break down some of the barriers you might be encountering as an organization to actually help you accelerate your generative AI initiatives. I'm here today with Josh Garon and Justin Swanberg from DataRobot, who are going to give you sort of an exclusive overview and insights into what we're hearing and seeing from a bunch of our generative AI customers so far, and how we're helping them kind of get to real value with generative AI quickly. And I'll let them introduce themselves in a few minutes. I'll introduce myself first. My name's Jenna Beglin. I am the product marketing lead for generative AI at DataRobot. I just want to take you through a little bit and sort of introduce what we are hearing from some of our customers from the early generative AI conversations we're having with them. And the goal is to really help you throughout the course of this webinar understand how to move past that inertia that we're hearing a lot of organizations are facing, and be able to leverage your predictive foundations to do that and to sort of give you a jump start into generative AI. So again, like I mentioned, my name is Jenna Beglin. I'm here with Josh and Justin as well. They'll give a more in-depth introduction in just a few minutes. But one of the big things that we're hearing from our customers, this is from a study that we just published with Omdia, in which we saw that 90% of companies have actually started their generative AI journey. They're thinking about it. They're starting to build things and experiment with things. They're starting to try to put things into production. But only 13% of organizations have actually managed to move a generative AI solution into production so far. So something's holding them back. We see that in the data, but we also hear it in a lot of the conversations that we're having on a day-to-day basis. One of the big things that we hear is really holding these companies back is what we at DataRobot like to call the confidence gap. And what that really means is generative AI introduces a lot of risk, new risks to an organization. There's a ton of value in the technology, but it does present some challenges, right? How do you have confidence in the responses that your generative AI application is giving, and how accurate they are? How do you control costs? How do you protect sensitive data? There are a lot of things that are sort of giving organizations pause when it comes to the actual confidence in their generative AI solutions. And for that, we have the DataRobot AI platform. Right? We've built in a lot of these safeguards. There are a lot of features and functionality in the platform now with our generative AI capabilities that help mitigate a lot of these risks that we're seeing emerging with this confidence problem. These are things like custom metrics you can track for generative AI applications, or guard models that really help prevent these solutions from leaking sensitive data, or approvals and alerts to make sure that like costs aren't ballooning. So the platform has a lot of really great features and functionalities built in to really help underpin some of this confidence problem with generative AI. And we'll get more into that a little bit later. But one of the other big things we're seeing, and we're going to talk about in depth today, is really what we're calling the execution gap. And it is about the fact that companies, a lot of the times, they're seeing challenges with organizational alignment, with having a clear strategy, with having a clear roadmap defined, with having the skills and the knowledge to actually know how to put a best of breed generative AI application into production. You can see here at the top, recent white paper published by IDC said 52% of companies cite a lack of skilled workers as a blocker to actually scaling AI across the organization, which is one of the top blockers that was cited in the study. So they're beyond some of these like concerns and the pause that some companies are having around this confidence gap. There's also some real like tactical execution challenges that companies are facing. So I'm going to pause there, and I would love to turn it over to Josh and Justin to start talking about some of this in depth. So to start off, Justin and Josh, do you want to give a quick introduction of who you are, what your role is, and some of the like real conversations you've been having with customers? And Josh, do you want to start?
Yeah, definitely happy to go first. Hi, everyone. So my name is Josh Garon. I'm an AI strategist here at DataRobot. So what I do essentially is support our customers on topics related to AI strategy and implementation. So that's everything from how do you go about finding and prioritizing the right use cases? How do you drive successful adoption and value realization of those use cases? And more broadly, how do we kind of think about maturing and scaling AI across organizations? My background is in consulting, so I used to work at McKinsey and Deloitte doing digital transformation. So I have a lot of experience working with large enterprises trying to bring large-scale change into their organization. In terms of real-world customer conversations, certainly generative AI has been a major topic for us here in EMEA. So there's palpable excitement across sectors, across countries, and virtually every customer we speak to is actively exploring Gen AI or in the process of building their Gen AI roadmaps. So just to give you an example, just last week I delivered a strategy workshop which had 40 participants at a large pharma company. And that was successful in uncovering exciting ideas everywhere from HR to marketing to R&D. So there's definitely a ton of excitement. At the same time, we do have a handful of clients that are actually going beyond that excitement phase, so starting to look at deployment. So there's a big focus right now on more internal focused use cases like building knowledge bases or building chatbots. And I've been delivering a number of these hackathons or hands-on hackathons across clients to try and get to rapid prototypes in DataRobot. And I'd say one thing I'm consistently amazed at is the speed at which clients can kind of stand up a working prototype using our platform. So I guess last thing I'd say in terms of my experience and the conversations I've had so far is there is a huge variance in terms of the readiness we see of organizations to get started with Gen AI. So there are some real challenges to navigate, and we can definitely talk about some of that today. Pass over to Justin.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it. And nice to meet everyone. My name is Justin Swansberg. I help to run DataRobot's applied AI practice. So that's the group of all the customer-facing data scientists you all have likely worked with, the ML engineers, the success function, the architects, et cetera, that really partner closely with our end customers to help them be more successful with the platform. And obviously, as of late, a big part of that has been helping to brainstorm a lot of generative use cases and helping to upskill a lot of our users on the art of the possible with Gen AI and how they can actually leverage a lot of that functionality that Jenna mentioned It's been built into our platform to help tackle these net new problems. And I'll probably save a lot of what I'm most interested in for Jenna to ask some questions about later on, but I will just point out that generative is incredibly exciting in the sense that there's a lot more possibility in terms of the types of problems that you can solve and how many folks can leverage it that may not have had the appropriate skills to develop a model in the predictive sense.
So Justin, right, you mentioned you're doing a lot of brainstorming with a lot of customers on these use cases. What are like 1 to 2 of the most interesting or compelling use cases you've come across so far?
There are so many, and it's one of the reasons that I really like working with generative is that you don't have to pick from just a handful, but I do think that we've seen some trends begin to emerge. And Josh briefly mentioned this, but I think that if I had to pick 1 or 2 chatbots where you can build applications that allow users to interact with some type of system or pipeline through natural language are probably the most common. And a couple examples of these chatbots are really systems built on your own internal or proprietary data. So you can combine your company's or your organization's data with some of these state-of-the-art LLMs, and they can be used to solve anything from some of the work that we've done here internally, like creating our DocSpot application on our website, actually, if folks want to take a look, where, as you can probably imagine, we have thousands and thousands of pages of documentation that outlines exactly what features and functionalities we support, rather than requiring folks to manually comb through all that data in detail. They can simply phrase a question in natural language and have a generative system comb through all of it and produce a really easy to consume answer. And then a few others that I would highlight here. We've done a lot of work on other types of chatbots in different verticals as well. So a pretty popular use case is building a chatbot for investment analysts or investment bankers to help them really easily and quickly actually better understand some of the securities or equities they're researching. And you can think of some of that internal data as combing through 10Qs, 10Ks, 8Ks, research reports, where it's really simple and quick to ask questions about an individual company's recent trends, a lot of the financial forecasts and the backwards-looking financial metrics, as well as to generate some strengths, weaknesses, risks, opportunities. So that's probably the first class. And then really quickly, the second class, I think, is some form of content generation. So at a really high level, I like to think of Gen AI as basically text in, text out. If you think about it pretty broadly, where text can be images, audio, videos. So a lot of use cases folks have been leveraging our platform to tackle have been either creating outbound content, it could be in the form of emails, for example, or summarizing inbound content. And that could be recordings from calls, it could be notes from radiologists or doctors, whatever that could be, to help really expedite what would traditionally be a much more manual process.
Well, thank you. So before we dive in further and talk to some of the obstacles we're seeing companies are facing, I'd love to do a quick poll and just get a pulse check on where all of you are in your generative AI journey. So if you could take a look and let us know, that would be great. Let's give a moment for everyone to vote and select an option. Let's see. Let's see the results. So yeah, it seems like a majority of folks are just starting those initial exploratory discussions, or starting to develop solutions. And this is the perfect time to be in this webinar, because we will talk about, like I mentioned, some common barriers, but also ways to move past those barriers and really help accelerate more folks into none of that I've got solutions already live bucket. So thank you for that. But Justin and Josh, what are some of these challenges that we're hearing companies bring up that are slowing them down or preventing them from actually getting these solutions into production?
I can maybe go first. And I think the way I would think about this is, as with any new technology, there's the technical sort of challenges that you face. So I think Justin is probably better placed to speak to those. And then there's the more organizational or execution challenges you face. So every company wants to be an AI company, but ultimately only a few are really able to successfully navigate that organizational inertia to get started. So while there are no doubt technical hurdles that you need to navigate, you really shouldn't lose sight of these more strategic and cultural obstacles as well. So just to name a few, if we think about the life cycle of maturing your Gen AI practice at your organization, the first thing you kind of run into is, how do we channel all this initial excitement around Gen AI into an actual concrete strategy and action plan? So often there's no shortage of ideas across the business, but kind of getting that organizational consensus on which ideas should you invest in and prioritize can be challenging. So there is no doubt huge potential for Gen AI, and we can, of course, get major efficiency gains in the short term, but we see that a lot of companies really have trouble defining which pilots to prioritize. And so that's kind of the first major challenge. The next one we see is, okay, great, we know which use case we want to follow, but how do we actually deliver on it? And moving from ideation to execution can be a real challenge for organizations. Upwards of companies are citing a lack of skill in the case of generative AI. So generative AI is a very new skill set. Most companies simply don't have the in-house skills to hit the ground running with it. And so that's a really important factor to consider. And then finally, we found that we built a roadmap, we put in place a use case. How do we actually get adoption of the use case? And how do we ensure that this technology is used responsibly? So ultimately, your employees are not going to use this tool or fully leverage it if they're not comfortable with the technology. And so there are real potential consequences if Gen AI applications are used by employees without understanding those limitations. And it's really important, as part of how you plan for Gen AI, to think about how you're going to create that organizational awareness around, what's the right way to use this technology, what are the opportunities for this technology, what are the risks. And a big part of that is also putting in place the right governance, risk management policies, as well as, and Justin will get into this, the technical foundations to ensure you have confidence in your Gen AI use cases. So that's how I'd look at it.
And I can add a few things from the technical perspective as well. There's probably two that I'd like to really call out in terms of some of the challenges we're seeing more often out in the field. And the first is that with generative, these solutions, be it some type of chatbot or Q&A system or anything that's similar, require a whole lot more iteration to get right. They're just natively a lot more sensitive, and there's so many different decisions you make, from the choice of technology, the LLM, the documents you want to provide as extra grounding data or context, and then a lot of what I'd call the hyperparameters as well. Those changes, even tiny tweaks to those changes, have outsized impact on the end response. And so it really, really is important to make sure you've got a carefully calibrated experiment tracking system set up that not only will log and track all the different experiments that you run, but also facilitates really quick iteration so that you can test out a whole bunch of different strategies and arrive at one that works really well for your use case. And the second, if you want to contrast this to traditional machine learning and predictive AI, is that it's a lot harder to assess the output. The text or images or audio that a lot of these models generate don't really have clear, objective, ground truth answers. And so instead, you've got to develop different assessment strategies to evaluate which setup is actually better for each use case. And even defining what correctness is tends to be a lot more subjective. And on top of that, there's a lot of non-determinism or randomness in these answers. And I'm sure everyone here has heard of this concept of hallucination, just trying to ensure that you've got enough confidence in the application that you develop. It's not going to drive itself off the tracks when you finally move it to production.
So it's definitely a journey starting from nothing, and getting a generative AI solution into production. What, like, we've got a lot of really wonderful customers here today, right, who have foundations in predictive AI, right? Predictive AI is not new. It's been around. People have been developing their internal capabilities and muscle around predictive AI. How can companies take that and use the lessons we learned from predictive to help on their journey with generative AI?
Why don't I start with this one, and then Josh, I'll hand it over to you. I think in terms of our platform and where we're investing, this idea of building on the predictive AI foundation you already have is what's most exciting. If there's one thing you can take away from the webinar, other than the Catalyst program that we're going to focus on, it's this idea of blending generative and predictive. And there are two different flavors. The first is that when you've already built and gotten value from predictive models, whether it's a customer churn model you have in prediction, whether it's a lead scoring model you have in prediction, a predictive maintenance model you have in production, you can layer on top generative models that help to better parse out or better translate how the model arrived at those predictions. So we've been working with a lot of customers that have already deployed predictive models that are now going and taking it a step further and helping to better explain how the model arrived at the predictions with a chatbot that users can actually have a conversation with. So it's one thing to have, let's say, a model that predicts how likely a customer is to churn the next renewal period. It's another thing entirely for, let's say, a customer success manager to be able to interact with that model and ask questions about why that particular customer is so at risk, and then get an answer back in natural language that not only understands or explains, rather, how the model arrived there, but can give some prescriptive suggestions or recommendations on what to do next. That's the first piece. The second is the inverse, where we found it's extremely helpful once you've built generative solutions to actually leverage predictive AI as a way to audit or guard the output. So we make it really easy with DataRobot to actually train traditional machine learning models against a lot of the output data, especially data we collect from human feedback over time, to build a model that can tell you how confident we should be in the responses from a generative system. And it's a way to help curb a lot of these hallucinations that tend to crop up in all of these systems. Josh, I'm not sure if you have anything to add to that.
I think that's well covered. All I'd say is we should really take the lessons that we've learned from predictive AI from an organizational standpoint, and also think that in the generative context. And to some extent, some of these strategies are even more important when it comes to generative AI. So if I think about some of these important factors to get in place from a strategic point of view, well, the first thing is, how do you build that strategic roadmap to jumpstart your program? And here, generative AI can really have transformative impact across the business. And a lot of people the temptation is to look at what are these niche productivity improvements that we can have by putting in place chatbots in isolated areas. But what I'd really encourage organizations to think about is, how can you think from a more transformative approach of where generative AI can be applied to really make an impact in the business? So if you're a retailer, that means redefining how you do your marketing. If you're a manufacturer, that could mean transforming your operations. And related to that is, this is very new. And so it's really important that as an organization, you have a bias to action. You prioritize quick learning and hands-on experimentation when it comes to Gen AI. So, it's just important to choose a pilot use case wisely that doesn't carry a significant level of risk, that isn't overly complex, and allows you to quickly demonstrate the value potential of generative AI to your wider organization without getting stuck in a long journey of development and approvals and governance and so on. So that's the second thing. Last thing I would say is, related to what we talked about earlier with the skills gap, it's very important as an organization that you think about what's your strategy in the short term and long term to fill those Gen AI skill gaps that you might have. So from a short-term perspective, it might mean that you have to invest in partnerships to speed up execution, to bridge those gaps. But from a long-term perspective, it's really important to think about who in your organization will be building these generative AI applications and how you're going to upskill them.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about a lot of risks. We've talked about a lot of obstacles. It can seem insurmountable. So what are we doing to help customers? Justin, I'll hand it off to you first. From a technical perspective, how are we helping our customers get past this barrier?
I think honestly, first and foremost, we're encouraging them just to get started. You need to work across your business to help everyone develop that generative muscle, and it begins with highlighting the art of the possible. A lot of these road mapping sessions that we've been facilitating are really helpful because it brings a lot of different voices to the table, and you can brainstorm an extremely long list of pretty high ROI use cases that we can help you to prioritize. So that's sort of the tactical bit. And then after that, it's really providing a platform that, like I mentioned earlier, helps expedite that experimentation cycle or that iteration process. Because the big difference, in my opinion, with generative AI is that you really do need to explore a lot of different configurations, setups, and strategies. And if it takes a long time to work your way through a single experiment, you're never going to really find that optimal one. And that's sort of what we've been, or how we've been approaching the problem from a technology point of view, especially with what we're calling our playground, basically a really simple and quick way to set up an experiment tracking strategy where anyone across the business can compare and contrast different strategies in a particularly short amount of time.
And Josh, what about from like an organizational perspective? There are a lot of real execution challenges we've touched on today. How can DataRobot help customers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, unsurprisingly, I'm sure you can imagine that we've been working a lot with our customer base over the last year on this topic. So everyone's focusing on how to get to value of Gen AI and how can they build up that internal confidence. So with that in mind, what we recently launched is a new program known as the Generative AI Catalyst Program, which has already seen quite a tremendous uptake across a number of our clients in different industries. And really the idea of this program is we want to put in place a targeted program that can help customers break down the inertia they may have to get started with generative AI and really address those challenges they face in executing use cases and building that organizational competence. So what it is really building a structured engagement that's customized to an organization's needs that can guide those clients end to end from strategy to literacy to building and deploying pilots with our platform so you can really quickly get to value of generative AI. So the foundation of this has really been the deep Gen AI expertise we have across our organization and the pattern recognition we've seen from hundreds of customers to really establish an effective framework for approaching this. And so the idea is what we look to do is, well, two sides of the equation. So the first side is give you access to the generative AI platform for the duration of the program. So all those benefits that Justin referenced, as well as having that proven approach to value creation. And so what we would do is try and craft a bespoke program that's specific to your challenges, your goals, and your needs. So to give you an example, if you're an organization that's fairly immature, looking for extensive support, that could entail a few big building blocks. So one of those building blocks would be, how do we upskill your organization on generative AI? So that means teaching your AI builders what are the best practices, having them participate in hands-on labs in hackathons to build their Gen AI skills, as well as building that broader organizational awareness amongst users and executives on what is generative AI, what are the opportunities, what are the risks, what are the challenges. So that's the first block. The second block we typically would look at would be everything we talked about, building that strategic roadmap of use cases. So running targeted workshops, which are facilitated by different DataRobot generative AI experts, where the goal is to find those high impact opportunity areas, quantify benefits, identify risks, build that roadmap, with a view to ultimately getting started on building a prototype of those really high priority ideas that we can pursue, which don't involve a high degree of complexity in the short term. And then finally, then comes the meat of actually building and deploying these use cases. So what we look to do is provide partnership and support to develop and deploy the solution. So give you access to our applied AI expert team to do that, as well as offer standardized approaches, templates, notebooks to help kickstart some of these common Gen AI use cases based on the implementation patterns we've seen across different customers. So the goal of this is as much about building use cases, demonstrating value, as it is about building up your organization's broader execution skills to be able to independently build those use cases in the future. So this would be kind of a more extensive example of how we would help What we look to do with this approach is really have a bespoke or customized framework. So the idea is we would dial up and down any of these components depending on the specific needs of the organization.
So how long would it take to sort of go through a program like this? And then what happens when it's done?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the best way to answer that would be to give an example. So we recently partnered with a major customer here in EMEA to deliver one of these programs. And so what we did is firstly start by delivering broad kind of training across the organization on generative AI. So we had education sessions with 50 plus employees across various departments on the foundational concepts of Gen AI. And having kind of given that knowledge, we were then able to engage in discussion on what are the opportunity areas they see across the business. So we delivered 4 different ideation workshops across different parts of the business that led to something like 50 or so different generative AI use cases being generated as ideas. And from there, helping them kind of narrow down what are those first set of generative AI applications they would like to build, and providing the hands-on support to rapidly stand up working pilots of those use cases. So in answer to your question, how long does it take to get results? Really, what we saw is after delivering those workshops within the space of just 1 month, we were already able to build 2 external-facing generative AI apps that are already being put to use by their customers. So one of those, just to give you a sense, is essentially a triage application that uses both predictive and generative AI to allow hospitals to understand which patients will likely not show up to appointments and get the verbal reasoning behind that as well. So long way of saying, in the space of say 1 to 2 months, what we were able to do is align on a generative AI strategy, build an actionable roadmap, learn the skills to scale independently with generative AI across the business, bring a few high priority Gen AI use cases into fruition and get started on some additional ones after that. All while having that backing of the strong foundational Gen AI and Pred AI platform.
So who, we're thinking about this Catalyst program, who should be considering it, and what types of customers would benefit from this, and where are they on their generative AI journey?
Yeah, so we see a wide range of different maturity levels, different goals. So I wouldn't say it's targeted to one specific persona. What we try and do is work with you to customize a program based on what your ambition is in terms of your vision for generative AI, the maturity of the roadmap you've built, what level of maturity, skills, and capacity do you have to deliver generative AI use cases, and how much support do you need in kind of building that foundational or future capability set that you need to be able to do it in the I think this program that construct the idea of this is that we've kind of accumulated by delivering these different engagements over the last year.
So with that, obviously we've got a lot of really exciting new things coming from DataRobot, both with our platform and this new service offering, to help our customers really accelerate their generative AI journey and start getting some of these really high priority use cases into production. So we're really excited, and we're really excited to hopefully help some more of our fantastic customers get past some of these obstacles and really start driving value with generative AI. So with that, I'd love to open it up, take a look at our Q&A, see if we have any questions that we can help answer.
I can certainly answer the 2 that are already there. I've seen.
Go for it.
And then I do just want to highlight in terms of the Catalyst program, we're trying to architect it so that it's as low friction as possible. And the starting point we landed on was just working with all of you to help build out a roadmap and highlight what that art of the possible is. So definitely encourage everyone to try and take advantage of that. And as far as the particular questions, I can provide a little bit more detail on what I meant by layering generative AI on top of predictive. And maybe I'll just piggyback on the example that Josh gave with the triaging app. I think that's a particularly good one. You can imagine with DataRobot or really any model, when we create these solutions, they can get fairly complicated. Even some of the features that serve as inputs aren't always as obvious, especially to someone that wasn't part of the model building process. So simply put, I think it's a way to translate the hard numbers that you might get from both the prediction and the prediction explanations into natural language that's far more consumable and digestible especially for a non-data science audience. So thinking back to that triage app that Josh mentioned again, it's one thing to highlight how likely a particular patient is to not show up to a scheduled appointment. It's another thing to highlight what those top 5 or 6 predictive or prediction explanations are. What we've done though is take it a step further and actually translated that into really a highly readable sentence or paragraph that explains exactly why someone is unlikely to show up. And it leverages not just the prediction explanations, but a lot of the source data and the customer specific information as well. And then on top of that, you can also add the ability to have a conversation. So if there's a piece of that that you don't understand, you can actually ask the chatbot and get back a more understandable answer. In fact, we've done this a lot for time series as well. It's the last example I can highlight here, where with forecasting, a lot of the what's called feature engineering you need to create beforehand is highly complicated. And even though we do surface prediction explanations, they are hard to parse. So you'll get factors like the number of whatever your target is over time for the past X many time periods. And that might get even more complicated when you factor in entropy or other data science terms. This is a way just to translate all of that into something that's far more simple to understand. And then in the time series case, let someone like, let's say a CFO who might be forecasting a particular budget or line item on their budget actually, again, ask questions about what is the forecasted trend? Why is there a spike on this particular day? What are the top 3 factors in plain English that are causing that spike?
And another question that came in. So Josh, do you recommend the Catalyst program after vendor selection or before? And are there different price points for the program?
Yeah, definitely. So I think we actually have a lot of customers or prospects we're speaking to at the moment that are really just very early stage in thinking about what they want to do with generative AI, evaluating different vendor options. And what we look to do with Catalyst is almost have a low commitment way to be able to evaluate what is the opportunity potential of generative AI, use our platform, see the capabilities. So I wouldn't say necessarily you have to wait till vendor selection stage. In fact, one thing I kind of forgot to mention earlier is what we're also doing is an even kind of lower commitment way where we would work with customers over 2 to 3 hours and deliver what we call a starter session. So without necessarily going to the length of a full program, but really just to allow you to very quickly engage about team to speak of Gen AI, talk about potential AI functionality. So that's probably a really good starting point for a lot of organizations to consider. On your question around price points for the Catalyst program, so there aren't kind of preset price points. The idea here is really we would customize it to your specific needs. So there's a wide variance in the nature of what the program could look like depending on the organization.
How much effort do you estimate is required for data prep to get someone actually going with the generative AI model and actually maybe be able to take advantage of something like the Catalyst program and accelerate having a use case put into production?
I could take a stab at this one. I do think that the answer, and you might not love to hear this, is that it entirely depends. If I double click though, I think that to get started, it typically requires very little, if any, data prep. And the whole point is that you want to build a system where you can iterate really quickly. So even if you start with barely any data prep, you can still get to a prototype that you can assess, evaluate, and then understand its failure modes. More broadly, though, with generative AI, there's a host of different decisions you need to make, from the choice of the vector database and the embedding strategy, the LLM you use, the problem framing. And interestingly enough, what we've found most impacts the final product is actually the quality of your data. So that's where we've tended to focus more of our time, since the whole pipeline is more sensitive to the data you actually feed it, sometimes even far more so than predictive. So I think this is more of a 2-part answer where you can get started right away. And in some cases, what you have out of the box will work good enough. Generally speaking, though, you're going to spend more of your time preparing data, but you don't do that upfront like you would with predictive. You do it once you get a baseline model deployed and you iterate over time. And that's part of why we built that flow directly into the platform.
Great. And I think along a similar vein, we had another question come in around, do we recommend a certain level of data or analytics maturity that an organization should have before they contemplate generative AI?
And I'm curious to hear Josh's thought too, but from my perspective, I think what's most exciting about generative AI is it's far more accessible. You don't need to have the same background or skill set you would to necessarily take advantage of traditional data science and machine learning. It, at the end of the day, like I mentioned, is effectively text in, text out, and it relies on the type of data that most organizations have in spades, and that's free form, unstructured text, images, videos. So I really don't think that it requires a lot of maturity, certainly not nearly as much as the predictive AI space requires. In fact, it arguably requires a lot more domain expertise and subject matter expertise than the actual hard coding and engineering skills, since most of the time you'll spend developing these solutions is actually evaluating the output, since it can be so subjective, and some of the largest concerns are around that confidence problem.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think two thoughts to me. So one is that with generative AI, we're really broadening the range of people that can build and use these applications, to Justin's point. You don't need data science on hand. You don't need data infrastructure to be able to get started. The second thing I'd say is it's also a question of what's your ambition. Going back to my previous discussion around what kind of use cases do you want to get started with? There are a ton of use cases you can do that have very quick value to the organization from a productivity or efficiency standpoint, that simply can be done for internal purposes and don't have to be exposed to customers, and therefore have a low degree of risk. So you don't need the same level of maturity around having those in place. So that's usually how it started for an organization a bit low maturity.
We have time for one more. So last question. You mentioned that there's a Catalyst program starter session. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And then how do I actually sign up for something like that or learn more about the program?
Yeah, definitely. So what this program is roughly 2 to 3 hours, typically delivered in two parts. So the first part is more about that organizational awareness on generative AI. So it's more of an executive level discussion on do we see the potential of generative AI? What is it? What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? What are the risks? On the back of that, having a discussion, basically initially forming a view on what the potential pipeline of use cases could look like for your organization. The second part, which is usually the more fun part, and we've been doing a lot of these lately, is essentially a kind of mini hackathon where you actually get your hands on in the platform. So what you do is essentially look to build a working generative AI application over the course of 2 hours using our UI or even using code-first approaches, to really understand what are our platform capabilities. And honestly, I've done a number of these sessions. We really see the light bulb click for a lot of people, just how easy it is to rapidly build use cases, or at least get a working prototype with this approach. So would really encourage people to take it up. In terms of how you can go about it, we'll send out some details shortly. So there'll be a form you can fill out. We can follow up there. If you're already a customer of ours, please feel free to reach out to the account team as well.
Do we have, I think we've just also posted some links in the chat for anyone who's interested in taking a look to learn more about the Catalyst program, and then also request that someone reaches out from DataRobot, and we can talk to you, give you a bit more information and figure out what your unique specific needs are. So with that, thank you everyone who attended today. Thank you, Josh and Justin, for being here and giving our customers all this fantastic insight. And yeah, we really do hope that we'll be able to be a part of all of your generative AI journeys, because it's really an exciting time, and we've already started to start making some really interesting, exciting impact on a lot of our customers. So again, thank you all for being here.